Good morning, Dave, and thank you for volunteering to join our series.
Okay.
I normally begin by asking people when they came to Chalk River, where they came from, and why Chalk River.
Well, I was born in Northern Ireland, and Anne and I had just got married, and we thought it would be good to go somewhere for an adventure. And we chose Canada. And in those days, you couldn't fly. You had to go by ocean-going liner. And Anne found that a very bad experience. Anyway, we got here and had no job to go to. We didn't come on invitation, we just came. We were told that Canada had lots of jobs. Diefenbaker was in charge. It turned out that the kind of work I was looking for required security clearance, and it took me 5 months to get a job. It happened to be in Montreal, working on the Avro Arrow. You're laughing. The Avro Arrow, I was there about 3 weeks. I got an invitation from Atomic Energy of Canada for a job. And I wrote back and said it would be disloyal of me to quit so soon. And that was fine. 2 weeks later, they laid me off. It was a Avro Arrow and it was all shut down. So AECL was good enough to take me anyway. And so that was the start of a very long relationship. It was hired into what was called operations with the NRX reactor. So the assignment was go and work at the NRX reactor, but it turned out that operations looked after many facilities at the plant, and one of them was the accelerator, which was used for research on atoms. Anyway, an accelerator sends particles down a vacuum tube at very high speed, bombards another particle, and it breaks it up, and the resulting scattering is measured by researchers.
That was on the 3.5 MeV in that tower at the end of 114 that later people never could figure out why that tower was there.
It was an upright Van de Graaff, and you said 3.5 MeV. My recollection was it was a 1 MeV, but it could. I've been wrong before. The neat thing about it was that it was in what's known as the non-active area.
Right.
So that you could work on the facility while it was operating. Meaning the researcher was unhappy with the way the accelerated beam was striking his target. You went in and you literally moved the vacuum tube to get it right. And so it went. There'd be a signal through the glass wall. Yeah, that's okay. And out you'd come.
The power was pretty small at that point.
Very, very low intensity. The radiation was quite allowable to be in there. It was
right.
Normal. Later on, when AECL got a more powerful tandem reactor.
That's the EN, came in, yes.
The first one.
Right.
Where the beam is accelerated from one end to the middle and then from the middle out to the other end.
Right.
And the other thing was that by that time, a lot of sophistication had occurred in the measurement of where this beam was, how you could manipulate it with bending magnets. And so you didn't have to go in to shuffle the beam tube. And in any event, you wouldn't have been allowed to do it. It was too intense. But through good vacuum, good magnets, and good electronics, you could monitor where you were. However, I now know that we didn't have really sophisticated measuring equipment like computers. Computers were a mystery.
Yes.
They were just starting. No one had them in their offices. But there was a computer brought in to capture the scattering of the particles from
Looking at the data from the experiments.
And so then the researcher could look at
Right.
this information later. And they were very proud of this computer. It stood, taller than me, about this wide, and had but the same capacity as my watch.
Yes,
today.
these days, that's right.
And however, so they had a big sign on it that was really warning people off. The signs, this was a sense of humor that the researchers had. Das Computermaschine ist nicht für Fingerpoken und Mittengraben. Keeping das hands in ein pocket und watching on blinking lights. So it was a very relaxed atmosphere. Research went on. Not three shifts, and introduced 2 shifts, which meant a day shift and an evening shift, which ended about midnight, and then everybody went home.
Right.
That changed with the next accelerator.
Right. Who were some of the early researchers in around that time?
It's hard to remember all their names.
Was Bromley still around at that time?
Al Bromley was there for the EN.
Right.
And he was a good researcher, and he let you know that. I remember one time we was sitting at the console, having gathered the information that he was looking for, pushing his chair back, and he said, "Gentlemen, we have made history tonight." I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. But later on, Al Bromley became the advisor to the president.
He went to Yale, and then he certainly advanced in the chain in the U.S. And another name around that time, and probably gentle competition, was Harry Gove as well.
Harry Gove was the head of the group that was running the EN.
I also have a picture from the files I was able to dig out of some of the operating crew at that time at the control room, and
Yes.
I didn't recognize all that many faces, but certainly one of them was Neil Byrne, and
Yes,
you and Neil and Moira eventually had an interesting group.
Well, we did. Moira was very interested in what's the name of the charity?
Oxfam at that time.
Oxfam.
That's right.
And Neil and I were getting interested in performing with guitars, and we managed to write up a song about Oxfam. And we were invited by the CBC to record it, and it was broadcast as a background to a speaker that was over the top for about a year.
Aha.
And there was no money involved. And
Charity.
No rights. Anyway, well, that was an interesting time. I didn't stay entirely, my early career was not entirely with accelerators, because Anne and I went back to Ireland, and I taught college for 5 years. And during that time we had our 2 children. And then I got information through Harry Collins, who was in charge of the operations group, that there was a vacancy, and it was on the MP,
Right.
the bigger accelerator.
Right.
And that didn't last either. I moved from there to University of Ottawa on their small accelerator.
Right.
And that didn't last because their funding was taken away. And I remember calling Al Harriet, did he have any openings? And he had said, I've got none in the accelerators, but NRU would welcome you. And that turned out to be the best decision I've ever made. NRU's a big place to manage. Each shift would have 30 people on it, 4 or 5 engineers, somewhere between 9 and 12 operators, and then other technicians to look after instrumentation.
And 3 shifts.
And the other key thing is when you say 3 shifts, you mean 3 shifts per day.
Right.
Which means 21 shifts per week. And normal people only work 5 shifts per week. And this was a difficult concept for some people to understand. Like, why do you have so many people in NRU? And the answer has to be, well, you've only worked 5 shifts. By the time you've done that, we've worked 21.
Mm-hmm.
All the time. Christmas included.
Yes. Who were some of the other people that either helped you along or that you had to do some training at NRU? Who were some of the other important people at that time? You mentioned Al.
I don't think Al was in charge of the division at that time. I have a great memory, I just can't remember
yes, I can remember the names of certainly Don Ross being involved into those days. And
well, Don was part of NRU,
okay.
part of the management team. When I got there, he was in what was known as the front office.
Right. John Inglis.
John Inglis would have been at that time Don Ross's boss. He was also in the front office, but Al Harriet was nominally the branch manager, but he was always away at some one thing or another. And one of them was Canada sold a small reactor to, I've forgotten where.
I think it was Pakistan that he was mostly involved in.
So a group of people had to go from, and were selected from NRU. People like Don Barrington, I remember.
Right.
Who turned out to be one of my shift bosses. When you went on shift, you had at least 4 different assignments that you had to go through, and nominally it would take about 4 years to do that. And one of them was Don Barrington was the guy who ran a particular shift.
Right.
So, and he was good. I touched a button on the control panel once, and he said, "I don't want to see you do that again." I found NRU to be a great place in the sense of how much there was to know and how many people you could interact with. People who were coming along at the same time as me would be Bernie Diabro, Greg Mark.
Right.
Those were the 2 main ones. And they both ended up as the branch manager of NRU. But I managed to stay at least 1 step ahead of them all the way through the whole progress. But I do remember one time you were required to work the Christmas Day if it was your turn.
Right.
So Greg and I liked to downhill ski. And we thought it would be great if we could downhill ski the slope beside NRU that ran from the top main entrance to the bottom main floor entrance. And we thought it would be great if we could ask the tow motor operator to bring us back. So,
private ski tow.
well, In those days, you could drive in.
Right.
So I put the skis on the top of the car and drove in with Greg, and we parked the car. It's a quiet Christmas day. We put our ski boots on, put the skis on, and had the operator all ready to go. And halfway down the hill, which isn't a big hill,
Right.
the reactor tripped. And so there we, now we weren't in charge of
Right.
restarting it.
Right.
George Young was in charge. But there was Greg and I ripping off our skis, running across the main floor in heavy ski boots to get into the control room to do what we were supposed to do to help.
Right.
There were fun times.
Right.
Anyway.
NRU, when it was originally designed, people thought maybe we've got a reactor going for maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, and it was remarkable how long it did go. By 1985, I have a note here that...
It's about 60 years, isn't it?
yeah, eventually. By 1985, you became the director of...
That's true, yes.
and you had a little bit of an aging beast in some ways on your hands. What were some of the challenges of even obtaining spare parts and control systems and things like that?
Well, NRU, of course, was not, did not have any instrumentation that was computer driven.
Right.
And nor were we allowed to do it after the fact. The whole safety case was built on the way the system was set up.
Right.
That made it difficult to actually get new technicians coming out of school to understand our electronics. So that was certainly one challenge. And the main control system involved a piece of electronics that was in a box, and we had no plans for it, no drawings that showed us. And we had one spare. And of course we arrived at the point where we didn't have a spare. And I had a electronics engineer on the group, a man called Jim Beatty.
Oh, yes.
And he plays guitar around, and is part of the ballet. He photographed this box several different ways and built it, a new one from the photographs, and did all the tests necessary. For example, the windings of some of the transformers, he would just count each winding, number of wires and how many times around. Well, we make it that way. And eventually he was able to make it. He was one of the very good ones. We had some really hot guys that did not want to be managers. They liked to do the job they were hard to do. The biggie for NRU, the biggest problem for NRU was, and was that way right to the end, was leakage of the heavy water system, which was routinely caught and drained into barrels and sent to the heavy water upgrading system before coming back. So those were peaceful times.
Right.
But there were times when there was enough leakage that we had to shut down.
Right.
And so numerous repairs. And on the way in here, you showed me a tube that was used.
That's right, the tool for the 2009 one there.
And you're calling it the 2009. I wasn't there, so it wasn't my fault.
Right.
But we did have, in my memory, 3 major shutdowns of NRU to repair leakage. And the very first one was to change the entire vessel.
Right.
That was around 1972, thereabouts. And I was just into NRU about a year and a half. It was a marvelous opportunity to get into rooms that were normally not accessible. After 6 months or so, the radiation backgrounds would drop enough to allow you to go in, take a peek, and come back out
Right.
again. And that was changing the entire vessel. That took essentially 2 years, shut down. At that time, we weren't very big into isotope production. So there wasn't a screaming horde out there in the hospitals screaming for a moly 99. Technetium really is what they were looking for.
Right.
But and then we had several minor leakages which required shutdown and fix. And then I've forgotten the year, but it was maybe 2000 or no, it would have been before the year 2000. It was shortly after I became in charge. Wasn't my fault.
Okay.
It leaked badly enough that we were shut down for almost 2 years, fixing it with long tools to go in and do this, that.
Right.
And then after I left, it had another leakage, which wasn't my fault either.
Right. Well, you mentioned that early on the isotopes were not that important, but by the time we were getting into the 2000 era, I think the number that I have was that 65% or something like that of the world's production of Moly 99 was coming from NRU. And that had to be the big pressure. I mean...
well, yes and no. And I don't recall 65. I recall 40. NRU was capable of supplying 40% of the world's demands at a certain time, mostly in the technetium
Right.
moly world. There were several other isotopes that were in demand, but nothing like moly, as we called it, was in big demand.
With the lifetime being fairly short, it was always crucial
That's right.
that
That's right.
you keep on top of it.
You had to, if you pulled out the moly, it went to the hot cells, it was treated, was put into flasks, it was delivered down to Ottawa.
Right.
And that was continuous, round the clock. You didn't never stopped. We had one incident with a moly delivery when the truck went off the road and spilled, including the flask. And a military helicopter came over to see what the problem was and blew dust everywhere. My boss wrote to him and said, please don't do that.
Right.
It turned out there was no leakage whatsoever.
Right.
So,
Bill Taylor kept on top of all those flasks
yes, he
and
did.
made sure they didn't leak.
Yes, he did a crackerjack job, that guy. The other thing about the moly and that was that it was definitely interfering with some of the critical research. So we go back to what is the main reason for NRU, apart from making an isotope for the States, plutonium, I think it was.
Early on, yes.
Early on, and I don't think we admit that too widely. But that market went away.
Right.
NRU's main contribution is to the CANDU reactor.
Right. All the loops and the testing and
All those, yes, and there was testing outside of the loops, and NRU was used to do all of that. Very critical. I mean, the CANDU reactor supplies 55% of the electricity for Ontario.
yes, even
So-
now, yes.
Without NRU, you wouldn't get a CANDU.
That's right.
So, in many ways, we saw isotope production as a bit of an interloper. But yeah, everybody's screaming about we want it delivered, but we've got other things to do here.
Right.
And one of them was we started to rent time on NRU. And it was an American company, Bell Battelle.
Yeah.
Battelle. And they had experiments which were taking their fuel to its limit. There could have been anyway. And they sent up a team of people who lived here for 3 and 4 months at a time. And that certainly did interfere with the isotopes.
Right.
But also at that time we had NRX still available.
Right.
And although it's an awkward way to produce isotopes in NRX, because it all had to be done by sending men into below the reactor, dressed in hazmat suits and so on, for a limited time, go in, do this, do that. Didn't really like to do that on a very regular basis.
Right.
Eventually Battelle did all they wanted to do, and they went away, and
Right.
we still shut down NRU for, again, the big problem was leakage.
Right.
I guess the isotopes were seen as essential, and it pleased the public to read about it.
And it was a great profile also for
yeah.
the company, and important. It was worldwide importance, actually. The number of people
yeah.
who were saved because of the isotope was
big time,
enormous, yeah.
big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should tell you a little thing about when I first joined AECL. I came up from Montreal, having worked on it was an RCA Victor offshoot company. As I was coming up to Chalk River, I wanted to find out a bit more about Chalk River, so I had a magazine. And there was an article in the magazine, which the main theme of the magazine was that Canada was about to build reactors that would supply electricity to the population of Ontario so cheaply there would be no charge for
Right.
it.
Well, things didn't quite work out like that.
Not quite.
No.
We didn't know all the regulations at the time. And there's
That's
another
right.
thing about NRU, is that it was designed according to the regulations and calculations of the day.
Right.
What they didn't do was calculate the effect of a seismic event. It was not.
It wasn't needed at that time.
At
early
time
on.
wasn't needed. And the other one was containment, so that if there was a leakage, it would stay in the building and not get into the Ottawa River
Right.
and upset those people in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Although some of us would have maybe liked to have done that
Right.
a few times.
Yeah.
So we were under tremendous pressure to start obeying the demands of what was then the Atomic Energy Control Board.
Changing of the regulations and everything that way.
They
Yes.
put serious pressure on us.
Right.
And some of them were simple things, and some of them were astonishingly difficult, and no space to do it.
Right.
You take one little example was that the NRU cooling system is by pumps, where water is pumped around. The backup system to those pumps was battery-driven pumps.
Right.
Slightly smaller. When I say smaller, they're bigger than 3 of us put together.
Right.
They were still big. And there's a control system that goes with those pumps. But it wasn't seismically qualified. So the word came down that we had to get that control system seismically qualified, and there were 4 of them. The calculations showed that you could keep the reactor cooled while shut down with 1 pump. In the course of time, 3 of those pumps got seismically qualified.
Okay.
And somehow or other they managed to, I wasn't there at the time, by the way, I take no blame for this. The 4th pump did not get seismically qualified in a timely manner. So at that time it was the Atomic Energy Control Board shut us down, would not allow us to restart. And in the end, the Prime Minister fired the leader. I've forgotten her name.
Linda Keane.
Linda Keane,
Yes.
right. And that put an end to that, but it also put an end to a few people at the plant.
Right.
So somebody had to pay for it.
Right.
And so a few senior heads rolled.
Yeah.
But that, for us, this was a silly thing.
Right.
We're now at year 45 or 50.
Yes.
And we've got 3 of them ready. Well, anyway.
Yeah. You mentioned the pressures of the isotope and the pressure of outside renters, but one group you haven't mentioned that maybe they weren't screaming quite as loud as you were hearing were Gerald Dolling's group and all the neutron scattering people.
The main floor researchers using neutrons, that they would access the sides of the reactor.
Right.
And the thing about that was that it was not invisible to the operations people, but we didn't have a big hand in executing it. We would supply up to point A.
Right.
And after that, the researcher
Once the gate was open, the neutrons were theirs. They had to take care of them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they had some very sophisticated collecting system and monitoring system and so on. People like Gerald Dolling.
We had Tom Holden sit down with us and describe a lot of that also.
Tom Holden's still around.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, he had a big thing there, and Bill Byers was very keen on getting another reactor.
Yes, the replacement for NRU, hopefully. But
yes, it really wasn't an argument they were going to win.
Right. So you retired eventually in
1999, I think.
Okay. And you've been...
That's about 23 years ago.
You haven't just sat back and put your feet up. I know you've been very, very active on the outdoors and...
Well, I tried to be active among many other people. To get to the plant, there's the highway.
Right.
And at one time the company was in the bus driving business, and you took a company bus to the plant. Or you could use the back road. And most people who did that would use a bicycle, but some ran it. They were runners that would run back and forward.
Right.
It's about 8 kilometers from the gate, and then you had to wherever you were in town. So in my case, from the NRU to my house was 13 and a half kilometers. And you could build up a repertoire that included one of those runs a week and bike the rest of the week and take the bus if it was raining.
Right.
It was a great life.
Right.
And then the company got out of the bus, and what you had to do was buy a year's bus ticket, whether you used it or not.
They had to get the guaranteed income.
Yeah. And the other thing that people did back and forward from Deep River was to ski. People like Ray Metcalf was a big leader in that one, because he lived right on the edge of the plant property. Yeah. And he tended to fool around with the trails that were in there.
There was even a group that canoed once in a while, and I think there was a hole in the fence not too far down from NRU that they succeeded for a few days of...
We don't want to talk about that, but...
That was before the security clampdown really occurred, though. There was
well, I had worked my way to being in charge of the whole division, but it didn't stop me riding the bike and coming into the office kind of sweaty and whatever. It annoyed the hell out of my secretary. And I was probably the only manager that had his underwear hanging up on a stand, but there happened to be its own bathroom, so
Right.
one of the perks. But anyway, I decided that the thing I hadn't done was canoe into the plant, solo canoe. So I set out to solo canoe into the plant. And there was a standard place where canoes would land outside of the plant property.
Right.
Well, it was all plant property, but outside of the fence.
Active fence, yes.
And you could haul your canoe, and then you had to climb up an escarpment a bit. It was just walk up it.
Right.
And you could then walk or get into the plant
Right.
either through the fence that
Right.
had a flaw, or you had to walk around the whole thing. And
Right.
so the head of security sent for me. Said, Did you canoe into work this morning, Dave? Yeah, I did, yes. Says, I'd like you to stop it. I said, why? He says, well, we employ a lot of students here every year, and I really, that they didn't get tempted into doing it whatsoever. Now, you know, across the river from the plant, there's an escarpment of tall
Yes.
cliffs. I said, well, people could hang glide from that cliff over there. He said, yeah, I know, we've looked into that. I said, what? But people have managed to get into the plant by biking, running, skiing, canoeing, kayaking, and the one that I don't think I would try was sailboarding, because it's a bit, you're really very dependent on the wind
Yes.
when you're sailboarding.
Yes.
And it has
Yes.
to be in the right direction to
Yes.
get you to where
Yeah.
you're going.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't try that.
Okay. Well, you certainly were active also in cross-country skiing and all of these activities,
yeah.
and your sense of writing and humor has come across really, really great in your book. I have really, really enjoyed
wow.
it, and
Thank you.
and it I think tells people who are looking at retirement that it's not the end of the road. There's an awful lot of
There's
things
an awful lot
you
of
can
things
keep
you
on
can keep-
doing
keep
there.
on
And
doing.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah, and it's still going. There's a group of cyclists that ride every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and that started mainly Brian Cheadle and a few friends started it about 23, 24 years ago. And I was still working at the time, and the very next year when I left, I joined that group, and we've both been in it ever since. And it is built from a group of 4 or 5 to as many as something like 23, 24 people, including 4 to 6 women who, let me tell you, are much faster than me. One thing we didn't cover was NRX.
Yeah.
And I don't want to,
No, that's fine. Yeah.
but it came time to shut down NRX.
Right.
And of course, NRX was the backup to the production of Molly. So that would have been a huge blow to the people in Ottawa.
Right.
But nonetheless, we had a situation with NRX where the cooling water that came into the main header before it went down through the reactor and
Right.
cooled off had developed a crack. Our safety analyst people declared that it was too big a risk. They weren't willing to sanction it.
Right.
So we announced that we were going to be shutting down NRX for ABC.
Right.
Ended up, I had 3 lawyers in my office for weeks working on our defense of that decision so that we could tell, I've forgotten the name of the company in Ottawa that we were working with, that this had to be.
Right.
And the words that came out of the lawyers was force majeure. You have no choice. It's forced on you.
Right.
I said, well, yeah, okay. We can live with that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they wanted us to, said that there wasn't enough risk, you shouldn't be shutting down, carry on as the backup supply.
Just in case NRU went down, yeah.
And of course NRU did go down.
Right.
And no NRX to back it.
Right.
It was also becoming we were being attacked from what was then Atomic Energy Control Board. Maybe by that time they'd changed.
To CNSC.
And that NRX was not following the latest. It went back to how did you train your operators, who was responsible for what,
Right.
what shift number of people had to be on the shift, and how were they trained, and even did such pokey little things like we had say have a 3-man crew in NRX when it was shut down. Okay, one of those crew had to be a lead hand. Well, we could have ended up, and did end up many times, with no qualified lead hand. When I say qualified, someone that you had appointed.
Right.
You're now the lead hand. Your salary will be whatever. It was a bump. But we could appoint you temporarily for a week.
Acting, yeah.
A week acting. Well, the regulators got into that and were giving me just hell over it. So I just simply said, okay, we will now cease to appoint people to be lead hand. They took me to court. The union.
Right.
And they won. Said, okay, here's your money. Thanks. Go. So we just continued to run NRX on the days that it did run, the old way, which was we would appoint you and pay you.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Atomic Energy Control Board are fuming at the mouth. You can't do that.
Right.
I said, well, shut us down. I would love that. Shut us down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Always on the edge of those problems.
Yeah. It was fun working with the lawyers. They have a completely different mindset when they want to get into they wanted charts of time scales, what you did here, there, went on. There were 3 of them.
Yeah.
And they came up with force majeure. I said, okay.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for coming in. I don't know that we've been able to catch very many people who started out from as early a time as you have and have kept going for a long, long time. And we certainly wish that you do keep going for quite some time.
Oh,
yet.
thank you, thank you. We're certainly well settled in Deep River.
Good. Thank you.